Do we need virtualization tools inside of our Windows 10 dev environment? We'll find out right here next on IT Pro TV.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
We are about to take a look at setting up virtualization tools inside of our Windows 10 dev environment, and here to help us to understand why we need to, as well as how to do it, Mr. Justin Denison. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ronnie.
All right, Justin, why would I actually ever need to consider setting this up when there are so many other things that are out there? Why would I consider setting up a virtualization environment?
So virtualization comes in when our situations become more complicated, when what we need to simulate locally and develop against becomes more than just our single machine, right? I'm running a Python script on my machine. It's perfectly fine. But what if I need to run a Python script that sets up machines to be networked together? Well, I need those machines and the networking components to all be available. Could we set those up in some kind of cloud environment? Absolutely, except that costs money. And then what happens if we need to tear them down? Pulling that locally just makes things a lot easier. In addition to these virtualization technologies, and I'm throwing one in here that I guess you could argue is not technically a virtualization technology, are available a lot of times as part of projects. As part of GitHub repositories, they'll have a Vagrant file, which is one of the tools we're going to use, which is Vagrant for managing virtual machines, automating those processes. Or they'll have a Docker file, which will set up a Docker container, similar to those virtual machines, but now it's just a container. Those are the two different ways we can approach this. Now, if you've watched the Linux episode, you're like, wait a minute, there was a third thing here somewhere. Oh, VirtualBox. Well, we don't need VirtualBox because in Windows 10 Pro and above, we have Hyper-V. Hyper-V will fit the bill where VirtualBox will not. I will forewarn you, if you install VirtualBox and try to run Docker for Windows, shenanigans ensues and things go horribly awry where you just kind of gnash your teeth and wring your hands. So you've been forewarned.
All right, so Justin, what are we going to start off with, and is the order important at times?
For now, nope, order's not important. Hyper-V should be enabled. We're going to make sure that it is enabled first. If it's not, you may have to enable it, let it install, restart your computer. Before we do that, though, we're going to go ahead and download this binary. So let's take a look at my screen here, and looks good. Let's zoom in just a little bit. There we go. Let's start over at vagrantup.com. So vagrantup.com, this will work with many different virtual machine providers, VirtualBox, VMware, and in this case, we're going to utilize it with Hyper-V. Now, in order to download that, I'm just going to click the download, and I'm going to go to the 64-bit Windows. I've already downloaded that, so I'm not going to download it again. We need to go ahead and download that. Get that started. Secondly, we're going to come over here and install Docker. We've navigated our way to docker.com. Now, Ronnie, way back when I tried this originally, Docker for Windows involved a whole lot of setup, and then they made it nicer, and then I was like, that's awesome, and you could just download it. You could come to the Docker website, download it, and everything was good. However, that has since changed. If I say, I want to see Docker Desktop, you go, oh, okay. Oh, yeah, I want to download. Now, if you just scroll down, you'll see Docker Desktop. Click on that. That'll take you to this products/Docker Desktop location. And then you go, I want to download that. Now, you'll notice it opens up a new tab for me, and it comes directly to this page. But look right here. I'm already logged into a Docker Hub account. As far as I can tell, there is no way to download Docker for Windows without a Docker Hub account. So, if you don't have one, you probably want to pause this video, go sign up for hub.docker.com, log in, and then come on back with us, because if you do not have a login and you have not logged in, this will just be an overlay that says, hey, what's your Docker ID and what's your password? You cannot download Docker for Windows. But once you get to this page, the download's actually pretty easy. You just click this button that says download Docker Desktop for Windows. It's a fairly large download, so it may take some time. I've already downloaded it, so I'm not going to download it again. As far as the two things that we need to download, we're good to go. However, in Windows, we need to make sure our is it I's are dotted, our lowercase j's are dotted, and our t's are crossed. Depending on, I guess, if you are print lowercase j's dotted.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so. Sorry, I forgot my letters there for a minute. I write in cursive a great deal. Those are downloading. We need to make sure there's a few prerequisites that we have in order. All right. So I'm going to come down here to my Windows key. I could have hit the Windows button, and I'm just going to search. And I think it's turn on, or nope. I like to search for Windows features. Turn Windows features on and off. That's the easiest way that I found to find it. There are, I think you can go through Control Panel or some other places. I just use the search functionality. It's actually pretty good in Windows 10. It'll open up this dialog box. See this Hyper-V stuff? Make sure that's checked. The first time you check it, it may have to download a few things, install, and you may need to complete a reboot. Go ahead and pause. Do that if this isn't checked. This has to be checked. Because this is checked, if we install VirtualBox, VirtualBox is broke. So just keep that in mind. Okay, Hyper-V's turned on. We have our downloads. We have all of our other dev tools. We want to provide Docker for our container systems. We want Hyper-V and Vagrant to be available for our virtual machine setups. Let's go ahead and get those installed. That way, we can see, we can double check that they're working. And I do need to show you something about Vagrant that is a little bit different if you're following along or looking at documentation because you're using Hyper-V as the virtualization provider.
All right, so which one are we going to start with?
Let's go ahead and start with Vagrant because for some reason on Windows, Vagrant is a little bit larger of an install. The Docker, even though it is a large download, actually is not that, doesn't take that long to install comparatively. So it's kind of odd. You could do either one, doesn't matter. So let's go ahead and come back to my screen. I'm going to go to my downloads folder and downloads. And right here, I have Vagrant and Docker. So I'm going to double click their Vagrant installer. It's going to open up my installer. And there's not a lot of selection to be made here. You have to accept the license. This is an MIT license. You should read this. MIT license is very permissive. So usually I feel pretty good about that. If those licenses are different, definitely take a gander and see, is there any shenanigans going on? I do want this to be able to make changes, and now my Vagrant is installing. Now, I'm going to do something that I usually don't do when I'm in a Linux machine. I'm going to kick off another install. Every once in a while, it will tell you I can't, there's contention for resources, wait till the other install is done. But if there's not an overlap, I can actually get away with installing a couple of things at once, which makes my life a little easier. This Docker desktop install, if you have Windows 10 Home, it will go, no, you can't do it. You have to have Pro or above. Secondly, you have to have a certain version or above of Pro or Enterprise. And I'm guessing Data Center, technically. If you do not have that, it will say you do not have build blah, blah, blah. You cannot install Docker. You may have to run updates. Oops. There's no way for me to tell you whether you do or not. When you run this, it will check that for you.
Now, Justin, I found out one of the great things about the Docker install as we do this is that if you don't have Hyper-V turned on, in other words, you forget, it will check it for you. So it actually goes through that check and says, hey, you don't have this installed. You may have to go ahead and do that. But once it's actually done, it says you're actually ready to go. You'll come up with the screen that we're about to take a look at next.
Yeah, and I will probably remove the desktop shortcut later. But for now, I'm going to leave it there because by default, the Docker daemon does not start on startup. So I need just an easy way to get to it. I'll make some changes there. You could definitely leave it forever and ever and ever, and now it's going to unpack a bunch of those files. And it may prompt me for some of the features that I forgot. But Ronnie's absolutely correct. Hey, you don't have Hyper-V turned on. You must have it turned on. And what's happening is that Docker is actually creating a tiny little VM. Actually, Docker used to work like this on all platforms except Linux. It would create a tiny little VM and layer the Docker engine over top of that. That has changed a little bit, but that virtualization layer is necessary in Windows for Docker for Windows to continue to work.
Now, Justin, I've even ran into this where it finishes installing, and even though you have Hyper-V turned on, it may ask you to do it again and reboot the computer. Mm-hmm. So don't be alarmed at that. It actually has still worked. But sometimes you get like, I already turned it on. Is something wrong? Just let it happen, and it tends to work.
Yep. And I've had that happen as well. And what's happened is over time, that install and the features that are turned on with Hyper-V and containers in Windows, they'll split those out, and you'll forget to turn one on, and then Docker will say, you must turn this on. So if I've shown you the initial setup, that's at least the bare minimum. If you get another, hey, you need to turn this on, just hit OK. The Docker installer will take care of it for you. Now, if we come back to my screen here, it says Docker Desktop is done. I need to check my Vagrant install. It's not finished, all right? This Vagrant install can take a little bit of time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let that Vagrant install work. I do need to do a reboot after the Vagrant install as well. You stay tuned. We're going to take a little bit of a TV timeout, let this run, install, so we're not looking at each other in complete silence. And then when we log back in, we'll come back. I'll show you how to check it and give you a little tip for utilizing Vagrant with Hyper-V. Well, I'm glad you stuck around. That was a few minutes. Well, it was for us. It probably was just a momentary lapse there for you. But we've done our install, we've done our reboot, and I actually went ahead and clicked an icon on the desktop, this Docker desktop icon. I allowed that to be put there because the initial click is going to start the Docker daemon. That Docker daemon can take a little bit of time to get up and running the first time, all right? It may happen that as you use it, as things change, that Docker daemon starting may take some time upon every reboot. So do be aware of that. When I started this, what happens is you get this little whale down here. It'll have the... Once that stops, the daemon started, you can click on it and do settings. If you always want to have Docker available to you, you'll want to click Start Docker Desktop when you log in. I do recommend automatically check for updates, and whether you send usage statistics or expose on a non-encrypted connection are totally up to you. All right, so just make sure you check those. How do we check that Docker actually works on this computer? What we're going to do is we're going to come over to Git Bash, and let me zoom out here. And I have Git Bash open, and I'm going to say docker -- version. That's promising. You will almost always get that, though. But if I say docker run hello world, it says unable to find image. I'm pulling it down. It's a very small image. It's going to pull that image down, fire up a container, which actually just does this small little printout that does a check for your Docker daemon running. As long as you see that, Docker's ready to go. Awesome. Vagrant. What about Vagrant? Well, if I do Vagrant -- version, looks good. There's one small difference that if you're on Windows with Hyper-V, you will always need to remember. For me, when I'm on Linux machines or on my Mac, because I'm leveraging VirtualBox, and VirtualBox is, if I'm not mistaken, the default provider for many Vagrant machines, I get to type Vagrant up. As long as there's a file in the folder where I am called a Vagrant file, Vagrant up will work. For you, you'll have to add that -- provider equals Hyper-V. If you don't, it'll go, what's going on? This will now make use of Hyper-V inside of Windows to provision those VMs instead of VirtualBox or VMware.
Now, Justin, did you mean to type Vagrant UPN?
I did not.
Okay, just want to make
you
sure.
caught me.
Nope.
Yep.
Just want to make sure. Now, there's something else that I thought of as we kind of went by that. The screen in the background where you showed the Docker settings there.
Mm-hmm.
What you did there was you actually right-click on that little whale icon that you saw in the system tray and then selected settings, right?
Yep.
So that way I just want to make sure that everybody actually understood that.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think either click works. So
Right.
left or right. Just click on the whale. It'll open this little context-sensitive menu. You click on settings. It'll open this. This is the general settings. You can set a bunch of other stuff like networks and proxies and daemons and set up Kubernetes. So Docker for Windows, or Docker Desktop for Windows, is a lot more full-featured than just a base install. I tend to make sure these, at least
Right.
during initial installation. So just a couple of things to remember, but we have one less tool that we had to install on Windows because by default, Hyper-V comes with Windows. So we didn't have to worry about VirtualBox, but we still brought on Docker. We still brought on Vagrant because you never know when that's going to make your life just a little bit easier. You may never use them for the next 3 months, and that's perfectly okay. But there may be that time where you go, wow, I have this complicated system that I need to simulate. You find a Cisco DevNet GitHub repo, and it's got a Vagrant file in it, and you go, all right, I have Vagrant. Vagrant up dash dash provider equals Hyper-V. It will provision everything for you. You're good to go, and you didn't have to worry about pointing and clicking and running scripts, and just makes our life easier. Likewise, if you have a Docker file there, it'll do a similar thing.
So if we ran that right now, because did you click enter once we ran it?
Nope.
Okay, so we just wanted to make sure I wasn't sure if that actually happened. So we did that right now, and we didn't have that. Would shenanigans happen?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I think the best way to see how shenanigans happens is to observe shenanigans, right?
Sounds good.
So let's go ahead and take a look at my screen real quick to see what Ronnie's talking about. I don't have any, so it'll be a capital V Vagrant file on my machine. So if I were to run this, it'll just go, it'll try its darndest. It'll go, I need to provision a machine. And it goes, I don't know. It does tell you if you run a vagrant init. So if I say vagrant init, and if I say trusty64, like so, it'll write a vagrant file for me. And now I'm using cat, even though this is on Windows. If I look at that vagrant file, this is that setup. Now if I were to run vagrant up dash dash provider equals Hyper-V, it will now read that vagrant file and provision an Ubuntu VM on my Windows machine. I like this because now if Ronnie and I both have vagrant, I've spent time, or he's spent time doing all the setup. Everything's configured, setting up networks, because vagrant also allows you to create like virtual networks between these devices and things. I can just hand it to him and go, hey Ronnie, run vagrant up and we'll have the same environment. Don't worry about messing it up, because you can tear it down, destroy it, and bring it back up fresh, good as new. So you'll get shenanigans if you don't have a vagrant file. Once you have a vagrant file, everything should be hunky-dory.
All right, Justin. Well, thank you again for helping us to understand more about the idea here of needing a virtualization pieces that we talked about. So we actually did take a look at Docker as well as using Vagrant, and Justin also justified the use of those, especially in our environments as things get more technical and complex. Well, that should be it for this episode. So signing off for IT Pro TV, I'm your host, Ronnie Wong.
And I'm Justin Dennison.
Stay tuned right here for more of your certified Cisco DevNet Associate Show.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.